you listen, head into chat. All the new PodPlusers, I know you're new because you're already typing in chat, but chat is normally quite active in PodPlus, so good to keep open. If you did listen, the importance of silence, Reg says, yes, one of the things that I'm rubbish at. Basically, I did spend most of that podcast going, don't interrupt, don't interrupt, don't interrupt. It's really hard to be like have lots of silences on a podcast, to be honest. It's quite hard. Sophie, do not worry, I will summarize it today and you can see if it's a good listen for you. The team listening, Petra, that's where we're going with the experiment today. We are a team, a learning team, and we're going to do that experiment together. I listened, I like if you miss something, just say so. Yeah, I like that too. And actually, I'm not going to bring that up today, but there is a link to the meditation thing, actually. So Kate, who's the journalist who wrote the book You're Not Listening, that you can see on your screen, she said that, you know, like when you're meditating, if anyone's ever tried this, like your mind, you're like trying to be really present and like breathe and all that great stuff. But then your mind goes to, oh gosh, like what haven't I done? What do I need to do? What email haven't I sent? And that's quite normal with meditating. So you try to, you basically have to just sort of let that happen, but then bring your awareness back. And so the same thing happens in a conversation, which is that, you might be talking to someone and you do intend to listen, but then your mind goes to the emails or whatever else is going on in your world. And she says, just sort of let that happen, like let it drift, but then bring it back. And what you can say is, I'm really sorry, would you mind just repeating that so I understand? Like, it's fine to say, I apologize, I missed what you just said then, would you mind repeating it? So you kind of go, sorry, that was me giving the thumbs up to the postman. The postman has started coming into my office midway through sessions. I don't quite know what to do about it. So that thumbs up was for the postman. Brought me some, I don't know, shoes, clothes, who knows, exciting things to look after this. You see, attention goes all over the place. Bring it back, bring it back. But she said, let that drift happen and then kind of ask a question and just be honest about it, because it's pretty normal. Anita listened, it was really interesting. The questions such as what did I learn? Yeah, we're going to talk about the questions as well today. Petra, you did some good listening. Lots of stuff with Petra. Brilliant. Okay, so these are some things that Kate said right at the end of the podcast that really stuck for me. So if you didn't listen to the end, you might not have seen these, but I said at the end, like, if someone was listening to the podcast and they wanted to take like one thing away or put one thing into action, like what would you recommend? And Kate said, just remember that listening can either help or hinder your understanding, and it strengthens or weakens the relationship. And there was something in that I found quite compelling, like that if I'm a better listener, I'll increase my understanding and I'll also increase the strength of the relationship. And there's quite a big why for that for me, like, okay, well, that is why I want to listen better. I'm going to learn more and build relationships. So I found that sort of quite a compelling reason why. And I have a few coach yourself questions that I thought we could maybe share with each other, because she talks about the importance of our attention when we're listening. And I thought a coach yourself question for you to reflect on and share in chat if you are willing is that, I don't know, you're listening to me now and you listen to lots of people in your working day. What are the sorts of stuff that compete with your attention when you are trying to listen? So the postman, but what else? Sophie says the to-do list. My thoughts, Amal says, so you've got lots of other things going on. Notifications, work alerts on my phone. Petra, to-dos, like an awareness of the other things you've got to do. Messages, other conversations, overthinking, so maybe starting to spiral a bit, Jamie. Deadlines. When will they finish? I love it. It's very honest. Like I was listening, but now you're just going on. We'll talk about conversational quality in a minute. Actually, it's interesting. Whatever catches my eye. Sometimes making sure. So Julie said, sometimes making sure I'm getting what I need at the time with my person. So, which is almost like you're directing that discussion, aren't you? Intentionally or unintentionally. You're like, this is going off the point that I want to have this conversation about, and might get kind of frustrating. The kids, Vivi, but they are cute, Vivi. Note taking while listening, find that quite tricky. That's interesting, Kate. Sometimes I think I find it helpful to take notes while I'm listening, or I keep the thought in my head and then I think so much about the thought that I stop listening. I don't know, so maybe that's quite a personal thing. Note taking, wanting to check the books that you're talking about on Google, panicking about what I'm about to see. Karen, we'll talk a little bit about that, Karen, like the listening in order to respond, like, so, which I think when you think, I need to respond to it. And I have this a lot on podcasts. I'll be honest, when I'm listening to a podcast, I'm always like, I need to be ready with a good question, so that for you listening, I don't go, great point. Don't know what to say now. I kind of go, that's probably not going to be a very good podcast. So I often have this conflict when I'm doing a podcast, which is that I need to be ready to respond with a question to make this an interesting discussion for the people that are listening. But then how much am I listening if I'm ready to respond with a question? I mean, you can get really meta about this stuff, but basically this is exactly what I was doing with Kate on the podcast. It was very strange. Okay, so another question to reflect on: what listening moments matter most to you in your working week? So what listening moments matter most to you in your working week? If you go through the meetings that you're in, so Leon says come one-to-ones with the team. So one-to-ones, when you're really invested in the outcomes, so maybe when you want something from it. Student appointments, daily stand-ups, Corinne, checking with colleagues, Bucky meeting with staff. There's lots of one-to-ones, daily stand-ups, talking to friends. That's interesting, Susie, talking to friends. The weekly team meeting. Lucy says listening to clients, describing organizations, coaching. Yeah, coaching sessions, Rachel, absolutely. Coaching conversations, ideation. Now, obviously, these are all different, right? Because we do different things. We work in different companies. We have different pressures and priorities. But the point behind this question, why it's an important coach yourself question, is what I took away from Kate is that when you are listening effectively, it takes a lot of energy. And what she talked about was that attention is a gift that you choose to give. And so goodness knows how many meetings you're in or how many conversations you have in a working week. But if you are going to give all of your attention, all of your like deep, focused attention to all of them, it's probably going to be quite draining, to be honest. So you might need to choose. Like, we're not trying to make you like a listening superhero every minute of every day. There might just be some moments in your week, I think, that matter most. And I think when you're really focusing on this skill, being very intentional about it, I think focusing first on the moments that matter most is probably like a good place to start. So if it is in the daily stand-ups, like Corinne said, or if it is in the coaching sessions, like try to get 10% better in those. and then hopefully that will have ripples on the other things that you do. But if you try to go, like Sarah Ellis always says, like 0 to hero, if you try to do that, that's like just it's quite a lot of pressure. I think, like, what are the 2 or 3 moments that matter most in your working week, and let's try to get like a bit better in those, and then just sort of trust that capability will then kind of create opportunities in other areas. With lots of back-to-back meetings, often I can't remember all the important info. Much better to have gaps in between. Yeah, Corinne, I have a workaround for that, which does not mean I'm a good listener, but my genuine workaround is that when I'm in a day of back-to-back meetings, I use Otter to dump what I've heard, because I find it hard, like particularly when those meetings are very different. Otter is like a free app, and I will basically go from one meeting, I will quickly record what I heard in that meeting without really reflecting on it too much. That's the problem. I don't really reflect. I just dump. I kind of go, had a conversation with Jane, next meeting, and then what I will then do is maybe before my next meeting with Jane, or at the end of the day, I will listen back to what I basically dumped. So I don't think that's that good. I think I should probably have space to reflect. Yeah, it's called Otter, Claudia. It's Otter, like you spelt it, and then .ai. I don't think that is a brilliant example of listening, everybody, because I'm not really reflecting on it in the moment. But it does help me. It does help me, like, because if I'm going back to back, I don't always have the time to reflect on it in the moment. So I just sort of dump what I've heard, and then I come back to it when I need to. So hopefully that's useful. So a couple of questions for you to kind of reflect on for yourself. Some stuff that stuck out for me, just some things that made me think a lot about my own conversations that Kate talked about in the discussion. So the first thing she said was, like, just reflect on the difference between a chat with somebody and a genuine connection. Now, she said that really good listening is when you are connecting to people. Like you feel you know them better, what's going on in their world, what they're working on as a result of that conversation, versus just a kind of a high level chat. And I just thought about, how many of the conversations that I'm having do I feel like I have connected with that person at an individual level versus having a chat? Like, I don't have the answer to that, but I think it's quite an interesting thing to reflect on. Another thing, this stuck, likable versus listenable, or listenable. I've made that word up. What the reason this stuck with me is she said that sometimes we're in such a rush to be liked at work. you know, like liked by our colleagues, to create energy with them, to make that kind of quick rapport with people, that we're very like, you know, energetic and hi, and what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes the need to be liked takes over the need to listen. And I was like, oh, oops, like oops in that moment. And I just thought, oh, what does that look like in your conversations, like your listenability versus your desire to be liked in a whether you're conscious of it or not, like whether you're not necessarily going into this conversation and going, I want this person to like me. It might just be a habit you've got into of how you have conversations, and that might be where it stems from, this sort of rush for rapport versus kind of an ability to create genuine connections. So, and not being like, so exactly, Steve, exactly. If you kind of build relationships through rapport and kind of you want to be liked, I think sometimes you can over rely on that and it might affect your ability to listen. And it's not, like I say, it might not be an intentional thing. It might be quite an unconscious thing. But if you reflected on the ratio in that conversation about how much you led with liking energy, you know, like that kind of, and how much you led with listening energy, I kind of wonder where you'd come out. Well, if you're like me, anyway. Oh, I've got one more in here before I want to talk about perform versus improvise. So the other thing that she said was, a lot of the time we're in conversations with people and it can feel a bit like a performance. She talked about ping pong, you know, it's like people are having a radio conversation with each other. And she said that if you're genuinely listening, you probably don't know where that conversation's going to go, because it's almost like you're improvising a lot based on what someone is saying versus this sort of more performative thing. And the thing that she said that stuck with me, again, this is where you become hyper conscious when you're talking to someone, is she said, oh, I've had so many conversations with people about my book and I feel like they're talking to me in tweets, or like they're looking for like that little phrase that you can share on social media. And I was like, oh, ask some better questions, Helen, that go in directions she's not expecting or wherever it was going. But I did think that was interesting, like how many conversations do we have at work that feel like a performance? You know, in meetings, there's like quite a lot of pressure, I think, in meetings to perform, like particularly if someone's presenting, and like performing versus improvising, like what would that look like in terms of the conversations that you're having? How much do you plan, prepare and predict what you're going to say versus put something out there and see how others respond and like kind of go with the flow a little bit? Again, I do not have the answers for this, but it was just when I was listening, they were like points of reflection for me in the conversations I was having. Before I move on to the next bit, any reflections from you? Any reflections from you on those things? Does it make you think differently? Not having a script, Claudia says. Yeah, less scripted conversations. I'm going to talk a little bit about scripts in a second. Steve says, so many conversations I have with C-suite, I'm literally coached in what to say. I wonder if that's the right thing now. Yeah, I wonder if it is. Like, does somebody coaching you what to say lead to genuine connection with somebody else? I don't know. I think some organizations encourage performance. I agree. And then I think, Bucky, that I've worked in one organization. Should I say it? Should I not? I don't know. I'll just say it. Well, I'll just say it. I worked in an organisation where everyone got called proctoids in Procter & Gamble, because everyone had a very similar style. And you kind of go, oh, if everyone's got a really similar style, then who's connecting with each other on a really individual and unique basis? Because, you know, we're all taught to do this in exactly the same way. It's interesting. Oh, what are you reading, Lucy? Connect, building exceptional relationships with colleagues. Interesting. Okay, so some stuff that might be useful for you. Oh, Rachel made me reflect on an interesting article on voice privilege. Please share that. That sounds fascinating. Please share that. If you can't find it now, Rachel, email it later. I'd love to read that. So some stuff about good conversation. So there were these 4 factors that contribute to what a good conversation feels like. And as I go through the 4 factors, I think this is a useful reflection in terms of the conversations that you're having, and also kind of when you're in listening mode. You can, you know, use it how you want, but the 4 factors I found this quite useful. First of all, quantity. So it is easier for someone to listen and for you to listen when you're feeling informed but not overwhelmed. So if you want people to listen well to you, just manage the amount of stuff you share at once. Like if there's loads, and I struggle with this, but and Sarah and Ellis and I both do actually, because we love what we do, and because we're quite curious about careers, we sort of know a lot around the edges. So sometimes I think we share too much because there's so much that we want to share that we think is useful, but maybe in 30 minutes on PodPlus it might be a bit too much. So quantity is important for people's ability to listen to you. So you want people to feel informed but not overwhelmed. The next one is quality. So for someone to listen to you, they need to believe in what you're saying, which is both belief in you, your credibility to say that thing, and also kind of like the truth in what you're saying. If you are you kind of a truth teller, which might be your approach, or it might be kind of, what you know. For example, we quite a few people in Amazing If at the moment are doing mental health first aid training. And we were kind of being sort of coached, taught on some things today. And for example, leading with, like, in my mental health first aid training, I was told that ... and almost there's like a credibility in that can help someone listen more to you. So you don't want to, use your job title as a badge and your qualification as a sign of status. It's not that, but just sometimes you might want to think about, like, how is my credibility coming across? Because that affects somebody's sort of desire to stay listening to me. Third one, relation. This is like feeling like you know where a conversation is going. So if a conversation feels really random and it's going all over the place, it's hard for someone to listen, like to stay with you, because they're like, I'm just going to come back when you get back to the point that we were talking about, but you've gone all over the place. Like, I'm not very good at this. I go all over the place with things, but sometimes you lose people's listening because you're going all over in different directions. And then manner, like, I feel comfortable in this conversation. So, and that doesn't mean that you have to like the person. They talk about it's an appropriate. So it's an appropriate thing. So if I'm talking to my best friend Kay, the manner of that conversation will be very different to if I was talking to a senior stakeholder in one of the organizations that I work with. Like, my comfort in those conversations would be different, but it would be appropriate for the relationship. That's the point. So if there's someone senior in an organization we work with starts becoming very informal with me, that might make me feel a bit funny, and it'll affect my kind of listening to that conversation. So it's an appropriate manner for the relationship with the person you're having with, if that makes sense. So again, no specific actions here, but I do think it is interesting if you're thinking about conversations that you are very interested in, ones where you think, I really listen to that, and it might be useful to think about, well, how are these things showing up that helped you to listen, and then if you think about conversations that you were really distracted in and you come away from it and go, I can't remember a thing that person said, like, which of these variables might have been at play? Useful point of reflection. I'm going to move us on because I've got loads in here and 9 minutes to go, and we've still got the experiment that I want to do. So some specific things that you can do: reflect on your rhythms. I thought this was quite interesting. So if you think about, in a conversation, two things going on, right? It's two-way. So you are both, you are both listening. So I'll do that in red, and you are both talking. So if I reflect on the rhythms of some people that I speak to regularly, Sarah Ellis, my brilliant business partner, when we have a conversation, I would say I kick that off and my rhythm is very excitable and fast. And then Sarah slows it down because she's more reflective and probably talks for a bit longer. And then I'll get a little bit excited about what she's saying and I'll speed it up again. And we just go on like that generally, like Helen's excited, Sarah's thoughtful, Helen's excited, Sarah's thoughtful. So that's like the rhythm I have with Sarah. The other Sarah, who is here, who hopefully we might be talking about her, I think we have quite a similar pace. So we will often, when we have conversations, I'll have an idea and Sarah will probably have some things that she wants to talk about. And then I'll have an idea and Sarah will have some things that she's like, yes, before we go on, we need to get this done. And we have quite a matched rhythm. It's quite pacey. It's quite fast. I would say it's quite similar. Would you agree, Sarah D? She's like, no, Helen, you never stop talking.
I agree with that.
Sarah's like, no, Helen, it's generally like this, and then you let me talk for like a minute and then you do whatever it is. But it might also be interesting to look at how other people reflect on rhythms. And then my kind of closest friend Kay, basically I do a lot of listening because Kay does quite a lot of talking, and then I'll kind of come in with like a question, and then she'll go off again. Generally, I can also see that rhythm in our WhatsApp messages quite a lot generally. But the point of this is reflect on your rhythms, because you don't want the same rhythm of every conversation, because that means you're not personalizing the discussion. Basically, like if you are listening and talking in an adaptive way, it is unlikely that the rhythm of every conversation you have would be the same. So reflecting on your rhythms is interesting. Sophie, if you use Teams, you can turn on Speaker Coach and you'll get a report at the end of the meeting with a meeting timeline. Wow, that's interesting. Idea for action, everybody. Oh, I didn't know about that, Sophie. Sophie Star, that's like a brilliant idea. Next one, spot your scripts. So a couple of people have mentioned scripts. The idea here is that sometimes we can get stuck in a script. We just say the same thing to lots of people over and over again. It's not very interesting. It's not very unique. It's not very adaptive. I think, first of all, like just reflect on how often are you saying the same thing, like to different people. But I always think sometimes you sound bored by your own voice when you say the same thing over and over. So just like shaking it up a little bit, even like the way we do podcast intros or anything, like, or when I'm talking to people about how Sarah and I started our business, you don't, if you're saying the same thing over and over to people, try not to say it in the same way, because I think you might get bored of it, but it might be the first time someone else has heard it. So kind of think about like, what scripts are you saying repeatedly to people? And maybe once you spot your scripts, it might be useful to kind of ask a few curious questions. So instead of me, I've started to do this, for example, instead of me leaping into, we are Amazing If, and this is what we do and how we came together, which I've said a lot, I will often ask people like, who's heard of Amazing If? How have you heard of it? For people that have heard of it, how's it? I'll go with questions first. And then I might go into, and then I'll kind of build on what someone said. Like I'll take a word they said and I'll go with it. And there's a risk there, because like no one might have heard of Amazing If or Squiggly Careers, and then I'm like, okay, but I will just follow like how many people have heard of it or not, for example. So I think if you recognize that you are saying the same thing, your introduction, the same way that you talk in a monthly meeting, you spot some scripts that are kind of on repeat, I would flip to some curious questions like, what do you think? What's your perspective? How aware are you of this? Like, how would you approach the situation? Just flip to some kind of curious conversations instead. Self-assess. So this is another one here. Oops, we don't want that. What Kate said to me is at the end of every question, you'll know you're listening if you can answer these two questions. What did I learn about the person from that conversation? And how did they feel at the end of the conversation? If you can't capture this, don't worry, because I've got a sort of summary for you that you can screenshot at the end of it. But I really wanted to quickly do an experiment. I've got 4 minutes. I want to do the experiment. Okay, we are going to do an improvisation exercise where somebody is going to start a story. You're going to come off mute and you're going to start a story. We're going to do it super quickly, and then you're going to point to somebody who has got their camera on, and they are going to continue the story. So you're going to spot someone who's got the camera on, they're going to continue it, they're going to spot someone else, and then we will continue until we conclude the story. Okay, we're going to do this for like 2 minutes, everyone. So this is designed to see how effective we are at listening and to improvise in the moment. If you want to be part of it, keep your camera on. If you don't want to be part of it, but you just want to see how this experiment goes, put your camera off. The point of that was it's quite a good team exercise to do, because you can't really preempt what you're going to say with that, because who knows that someone's going to run into a garden and that there's going to be a dog and that there's going to be children involved. Like that's the point. So it's quite a good sort of listening exercise to do for everyone. Final quote here, and then one more thing I want to tell you, everybody. So look up once in a while and see who might want to talk to you. I thought that was nice. Kate said you've got to put yourself in a position where people want you to listen to them. So if your head's down all the time, they might not know that you're kind of a listener for them. This is your screenshotable summary of everything we have talked about. So please screenshot and share it if it is useful for you. It might be useful to other people, or point in the direction of the pod sheet and all that good stuff.